Metros. They've been the backbone of transportation in cities all around the globe, and have been for more than a century. With some of the first being built in the late 1800s, it's a rail technology that has evolved considerably from its humble beginnings as steam trains and tunnels, especially in North America, being home to many cities that pioneered metro systems such as New York City, Philly, Boston, and Chicago. These systems built during the early 20th century would come to be known as the first wave of American metro systems. But let's fast forward about 30 years later. It's the mid-20th century, and America has a new transportation obsession: cars. During the mid-20th century, America went on a quest to build as many highways as possible, but even back during the heyday of paving over every neighborhood for a 6-lane highway and city planners realized that traffic was still going to be a major issue. So what on earth do you do about this? Well, if you're the Florida Department of Transportation or TxDOT, you just simply make 40-lane highways. But many of these cities still saw public transportation as a viable option to reduce traffic, and so began a new wave of building metros in the US. The first of these projects would begin in the 1960s, with the conversion and extension of the former bridge line between Philadelphia and Camden, New Jersey, into the Patco Speed Line opening in 1969. This was a mostly quiet start for what would eventually become a surge of new metro projects constructed throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s. With funding initially coming from the Johnson administration, 3 cities would end up creating full, brand new, state-of-the-art metro systems to move people around the metro areas. A couple other lines would also be completed in the late 70s and early 80s, becoming the first metro lines within their cities before federal funding would dry up and this second era of subway construction within the US. But how are these systems different than the earlier metros that were built during the start of the 20th century? Infrastructure of all kinds is representative of how the planners of that time saw how it would best serve the people that would use it, and there's really no better example of this than the second-generation metros of the US. Transit in most US cities during the early 20th century was for the most part made for getting people around the city, as suburban sprawl really wasn't a major factor yet. You'd have streetcars for short trips to close neighborhoods, the metro was for getting across town, and if you had to go out to a nearby city that was say 30 or 40 miles away, you'd hop on the regional rail. However, in the mid-20th century, because of subsidies from the federal government, housing was dirt cheap to build, and this meant that suburban sprawl could easily boom and really expand the amount of development around a metro area. Areas that were once just cornfields became shopping centers and neighborhoods full of low-density sprawl. And while many neighborhoods and cities would decline from people moving out to the suburbs, many jobs were still concentrated in the downtowns of these cities. This meant plenty of congestion for drivers on their commutes to their 9-to-5 office jobs in downtown, and thus a solution had to be made. While some cities had commuter rail already to handle this, many cities around the country that had been booming in the recent years, such as Atlanta, didn't have this luxury. So it was reasonably thought by planners at the time that why don't we just blend the benefits of regional rail, such as the speed and comfort aspects of it, with the more frequent service that a metro can provide. This became the common theme for these systems that we see from this era, such as MARTA in Atlanta, the DC Metro, and BART. Unlike the legacy systems that you'll see in other cities, many of these stations have large distances between the station stops. This was also fueled by the idea that as the systems were made for the 9-to-5 commuter to avoid traffic, that they would drive to the station, park there, and ride the train in, and then take it back to the suburb and drive the last bit of their commute home. This is why when you look at many of the stations that aren't in the center of the city on these lines, that they'll often be surrounded by a bunch of parking. Whether it's surface lots or parking garages, the main goal of these new metros for the most part was traffic reduction on highways and other main thoroughfares around the city. One of the ways that they wanted to make these metros more appealing was to make them faster. These mid-century metros are much faster than their legacy counterparts, and that was so they could more easily pull suburban riders away from their car trips into the city. And on top of this, to make this transit commute more appealing, many of these cities were planned to get downtown people movers to fill in the last mile connections from the downtown downtown metro stations to people's jobs and offices not too close to the stations. Despite this vision, most of these people mover projects were scrapped, with only 3 remaining in Detroit, Jacksonville, and the only city to get both a metro and a people mover was Miami, Florida. But the main goal of these metros in the mid-20th century wasn't to create car-free spaces or more walkable cities. They didn't push back against suburbia, they embraced it and the 9-to-5 commute wholeheartedly, with the goal in mind to reduce traffic during the rush hour on commutes into the city. But it's no longer the mid-20th century anymore, and it's been almost half a century since the last of these metros were built. So let's see how these mid-20th century metros are holding up now. But you know what's really holding up well now? My patrons. Their support has helped make this video possible. Not only that, but they get benefits like early access to videos, extra videos, their name in the credits, and more, like an extra segment on the LA Metro in this video. If you want to become a patron and help support the channel, the link is down below. But let's get back into the video. There are 6 different metro systems that fall into the mid-20th century wave of metro building. And these 3 really only got a small portion of the intended networks that were planned for their cities. In most cases, it was due to issues with funding, but regardless, they at least got the first portion of their line built. First, as mentioned earlier in the video, we have the Patco Speed Line. It was kind of the main model that a lot of the other metro lines and networks would kind of base themselves after. Running from Lindenwold, New Jersey into Center City in Philly, this line has pretty standard stations within Center City and Camden, but once the line exits this area, the stations have wide spacing and massive amounts of parking surrounding the stations. Much in the typical style of mid-century American metros, the other 2 single-line metros that got built, the Baltimore Metro Subway Link and Miami's Metrorail, were both single lines of what was supposed to be much larger networks. However, funding to expand these lines was cut before any other lines could be built. While Baltimore is one single line that runs from downtown Baltimore into a few of the more low-density suburbs surrounding the city, Miami is technically a 2-line system despite it really just being 1 line with a spur. The Metrorail does run through some more dense areas, and like I said earlier, has complimentary service from the People Mover in downtown Miami, as well as from Tri-Rail, South Florida's regional rail. These lines have had, or currently have, issues with ridership, but a lot of that can be attributed to not really having any benefits of network effects. So let's look at some actual mid-20th century metro networks. These networks are really the iconic lines of the mid-20th century American metros. These 3 metros were all funded in the 60s as part of President Johnson's Great Society project. First, we have Atlanta. While it was the last of the major mid-century metros to open, and was originally planned to be built for the city of Seattle instead of Atlanta, MARTA has been huge in providing transit for the residents of the Atlanta metro area. While it is technically the least successful of the 3 metro networks, that mainly comes down to the fact that MARTA operates without any state support and is entirely dependent on the counties that it runs in and the federal government for funding to run and expand the service. And without MARTA being built, it's unlikely that the city of Atlanta would ever have built out a transit network to the extent that it did, or even be the city that it is now. Still though, MARTA is planning to improve service on its metro, with the creation of 4 infill stations on its existing lines to make the system more accessible to different neighborhoods. Next, we have the Bay Area Rapid Transit, or BART for short, in the San Francisco Bay Area, providing connections to most of the major Bay Area cities and most of the counties in the region. It's gotten a fair share of expansions over the years, however, the system has dealt with some ridership issues in recent years. It's good, but it's definitely got some downsides that really hold it back from being the best of the 3. But without a doubt, the best of the 3 has to be the DC Metro. With the highest ridership on a metro network outside of New York City, the large network that WMATA has built out for the DC Metro over the past few decades, with local, state, and federal support, has truly helped it shine and provide transit for residents of the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. Now, you might have heard me mention that many of these systems at some point in their history have had some ridership issues. and this is really no surprise if you look just at how they were built. While having wider stop spacing and making the metros faster are usually good for ridership, one of the biggest issues with these systems is the land use around the stations. A vast majority of the area around these stations in this design are dedicated to parking spaces. Having a few stations with some parking isn't an issue and can actually be really good for ridership, especially at stations near the end of the line in the exurban areas of a city. But if a vast majority of the land around your stations is dedicated to parking, then no one's going to take transit, especially if the vast majority of land use around the station is dedicated to car-dependent planning. While MARTA and BART have really been suffering from this, the metro system that's really overcome this in recent years has been the DC Metro. While there are many stations that do have a vast amount of parking surrounding them, a large number of stations that are closer to the city have had some great mixed-use developments zoned around the stations, which can generate ridership for the network. Metros are one of the biggest investments a city can make into public transit, but they often have huge payoffs for cities with the reduction of car dependency and promoting ancillary economic impacts within a city. While these metros do have plenty of issues, mainly stemming from the faults of planning based entirely around the car in the 20th century, like all transit, these networks can adapt to changing needs. With transit being needed for more than just the 9 to 5, cities with these mid-century metros are looking into expansion and enhancement of service on their networks to provide more transit, as these metros can promote the reduction of car dependency within cities, make transit more accessible to more regions of metro areas, and make the cities that do have them a better place to live. But how do you feel about these second wave metros of the mid-century? Do you think they serve their respective cities and metro areas well? How do you think we can improve these systems? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. I want to thank everybody who helped me make this video, and I especially want to thank Tony Stunts, as well as John Schukites, and all of my other patrons who help support the channel. Their support is greatly appreciated and helps me make better content for all of you. And if you want early access to videos, extra videos, your name in the credits, and more, feel free to check out my Patreon. The link is down below. Also down there you'll find links to my social media and Discord where I post updates and hang out with all of y'all. And if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching the video. Your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much, and as always, I'll see y'all on the next one.